I love the part when Callus says, "Enjoy the celebration, citizen." Like, the Empire really just is the Republic. It's just the Republic, isn't it? Welcome back to Rebels Revisited. We are halfway through season 1 as of this installment. How crazy is that? This is a huge installment since I'm trying to cram 2 episodes in, so let's jump right in. This is Empire Day and Gathering Forces Revisited. Okay, first of all, Empire Day contains the most important scene in the entire series, which is patriotic Kanan. Will I get copyright blocked if I put in the clip? Let's find out.
This area's off limits.
Did you see it? It's so beautiful. All the colors, it's like a rainbow.
Dad, what are you doing? Sorry, mister, my dad is just so patriotic, you know?
Empire Day! I love it! All hail our glorious empire!
Right, well, move along.
Both comedy and Star Wars peaked right here. It's the way that Freddie Prinze Jr. takes on an exaggerated and distinctly American accent. Anyway, honorable mention goes to Hera clapping at the tie while planning to blow it up. Okay, I love how detailed the animators are in bringing these characters to life. I don't know how to describe this. Okay, they stand and sit and gesture in interesting ways that make them more believable. Like, they really come alive and feel real. Little details of how these characters move and take up space just jump out to me in this show. I appreciate the nuance that the animators approach them with. Okay, Sibo is a really interesting figure to me. I like seeing his perspective of being afraid of revolution and then repenting for his mistake. And it is framed as repentance, and it is framed as a mistake. Sibo was never a bad person, but redemption was still required for his actions, or lack thereof. His fear required redemption. And that's, I don't know guys, that's a pretty radical concept when you think about it. And I don't think most people watching this show have actually sat down and thought about that, but they're making a rather bold statement with Sibo. Alright guys, time for the Ezra stand jump out. I have a boundless amount of love and sympathy for Ezra, and this episode always makes me feel so sad for him. He has been fending for himself for 8 years. Since he was 7, I think we take for granted how deeply that affects Ezra. So much of Ezra's behavior is rooted in his childhood trauma. We don't know exactly what happened to Ezra when he was on his own, but there's a lot of potential for some pretty bad experiences. Plus, just being so young and struggling for survival on your own day to day is awful enough. And everyone is so concerned with calling Ezra childish and annoying, and even saying he ruined the show even though he's the protagonist. And like, okay, but do people not want to think critically about what they watch? Ezra is the way he is for a reason. I'm not saying that people need to love him. I'm not even saying that people shouldn't think he's annoying or whatever, but there's such a lack of willingness to understand him. The loss of parents at such a young age is incredibly traumatic and requires a lot of support that Ezra did not get. On top of that, he had to fight every day for his own survival. As a 7-year-old, he has a lot of negative emotions, and he does not understand how to healthily cope with or release them. Do you understand the level of unsafeness that he would have felt with no reprieve for years? Do you understand how many defense mechanisms he would have had to cultivate? Oh my god. Yes, he's self-centered. Yes, he's combative. Yes, he's stubborn. But it's a miracle that he's doing as well as he is when we meet him. The lack of sympathy for Ezra from people who have watched the show, it makes me so sad. People say Ezra was so annoying, he was the worst part of the show, it would have been so good without him. And then people reply to that with, come on, he was a good character by season 3, and he was always a good character, who was probably really important to a number of kids who had unstable childhoods and could project onto him anyway. And that is why his relationship to the Ghost Crew, and especially Kanan, makes me so emotional. He knew what it was like to have a loving family, and then he lost it all in a second, and he lived through an impossible 8 years. And then this group of people takes him in, and they love him. They show him love and he finally has a family again, and oh my god. And Kanan in particular is so loving to him, and he's always there to guide and comfort him after 8 years. I'm sorry. And Kanan is such a great guide. This episode has some of my absolute favorite Kanan teaching moments. The opening scene, where Kanan is teaching Ezra to connect with the Loft Cat, is so great. Look at some of these quotes. Step outside of yourself. Make a connection with another being. The point is that you're not alone. You're connected to every living thing in the universe. But to discover that, you have to let your guard down. You have to be willing to attach to others. If you hang on to your past, if you always try to protect yourself, you'll never be a Jedi. Does that not give you chills? This is what I mean when I say that Kanan functions best when he just relies on his relationship to the Force rather than the rules of the Jedi. He understands how attachment should work for Jedi. You should have attachments. You should have things and people that you care about, but you shouldn't let your attachments cause imbalance. It can't become unhealthy. You have to know when to let go. Kanan is such a good mentor and father figure to Ezra because he's incredibly intuitive. Ezra is highly emotional but has trouble understanding and controlling it, and again, his past completely affects the way that he functions. Kanan's sharp intuition allows him to be very in tune with Ezra in all the right ways. Like, here, Kanan recognizes that Ezra isn't just being difficult about training, but that something is actually wrong, and he lets Ezra know that he has to open up about it in order for training to work. And then Kanan plunges Ezra right into the situation of having to connect with the Fear Nox because he knows things will click with Ezra when he has to use a skill to survive. However, it's different here than it was in Ezra's past because now Ezra has someone to watch his back as he's trying to survive. Then here, Ezra admits that he's scared, and Kanan commends him for that admission and acknowledges that it shows growth. God, I love that. Like, these aren't dialogues that the show had to include, but it does, and it does all the time. The show consistently has characters actively working through their emotions, and we actually get to see those processes. They talk about what they feel to others, and they give and accept validation and advice. You guys, this is it. This is why, as an individual body of work, like separate from Star Wars, this is why this show matters. This is why it's something so personal to me. I don't think I can fully revisit and discuss Rebels without talking about why it's personal to me, because it's a really big part of why I like it. Rebels came to me exactly when I needed it, and honestly, I credit it with being the thing that actually taught me that it's okay to feel things. It's the way that the show normalizes that sort of healthy emotional behavior. Like, when I think back on my life, I honestly think that Rebels is what helped me to internalize the fact that I'm allowed to and I should feel and process my emotions, and I owe a lot to Rebels because of that, and I bet I'm not the only one. Alright, this scene. It's one of my favorites in the entire series. Fingers crossed that the copyright gods don't smite me for this.
You're blocked! Let go!
I can't!
Don't be afraid.
I'm not afraid of them.
Then what?
I don't know.
Yes, you do. Ezra, what are you afraid of?
I'm afraid of knowing. I'm afraid of the truth. Sorry. I'm sorry. I forgive you, Sibo.
Does this not give you chills? The intensity of these emotions. The way that Kanan leads Ezra to releasing his feelings and forgiving Sibo, which is huge. The incredibly raw admission of, I'm afraid of the truth. The way that Freddie Prinze Jr. absolutely kills the performance, as always. Just everything. Everything about this. And, of course, Ezra's brush with the dark side. I will never forget watching this scene for the first time. It took my breath away. Like, I literally still remember watching it. I love how intensely Ezra feels, whether it's good or bad. His emotions are clearly very strong and volatile here. He is able to summon that huge fear knock using the dark side. The dark side because he hasn't learned to channel that emotion into positive action. Ezra's in a very negative space, and he's learning to grow beyond it, but he's not there yet. If we think about where he started, he's grown in the respect that he's willing to be open about his feelings and that he's let himself accept a new family. but he still has a lot of growing to do because this is what happens when that newfound sense of security is threatened. His arc regarding emotions is never about like maturing beyond feeling intensely. It's about learning how to release those feelings in a healthier way. And I like that having intense feelings is always a part of Ezra up to the very last episode. That's the biggest reason why he's so important to me. Like, I deeply identified with that, and before Ezra, I had never seen a character who I identified with so closely in that respect. So this aspect of Ezra was depicted so vividly and so well, and I really appreciate it. I really feel for Kanan in this moment too. This is the moment where it's driven home that he's kind of in over his head. By this point, Kanan cares about Ezra so much, and he still doesn't completely trust himself to guide Ezra successfully. And now he witnesses this brush with the dark side. Like, think about that, guys. That's scary for Kanan. Like, that's the precursor to one of his greatest fears. This is scary on both sides because Ezra doesn't understand what he did and it doesn't feel good and he's scared of it. And Kanan does know what Ezra did, and that's kind of worse. I love their conversation at the end. I love the way Ezra's sitting. He's so drawn into himself. He's shaken up, he's scared of what he did because it didn't feel right, and he doesn't understand it. And I love how Kanan deals with Ezra here. He makes sure that Ezra knows how serious this is, but he calmly explains how Ezra tapped into the dark side. He also makes sure that Ezra knows that it doesn't make him a bad person, and that, you know, he had good intentions, and that he didn't mean to do anything wrong. He makes sure Ezra knows that he knows that. He just makes sure that Ezra feels safe in this space and in this relationship. He's very clearly creating an environment where it's safe to make mistakes and talk about serious topics. And I could literally, I can, and I have literally cried over this. I love how that conversation closes too. Like, it has a resolution, but it's not terribly satisfying or even comforting. Kanan acknowledges that he didn't prepare Ezra to deal with the dark side and he apologized for it. And that's it. There's no moment of reassurance but everything will be okay. None of that, because Kanan and Ezra are both scared and neither one of them knows it's actually going to be okay. And that was definitely a more realistic way to wrap up this episode. And then after that, I love how Kanan immediately jumps in saying Ezra needs space right now when Hera tries talking to him. Just something about people looking out for other people's mental health and functioning healthily as a family unit makes me really emotional. And lastly, the picture of Ezra and his parents makes me cry every time. Well, that was a jam-packed installment. I hope you feel enriched and enlightened. Thanks for watching, and may the Force be with you always.